I'm going to take you back to a story we talked about a long time ago called LinkedIn versus HiQ. For those of you who do not remember this story, allow me to refresh your memories a little bit. LinkedIn, as you know, is a large-scale social network used for businesses, used for kind of business and professional connections. Most of you watching probably have a LinkedIn. And HiQ, or HiQ Labs, is a small company who was essentially doing some scraping of LinkedIn in order to create databases and create data that they could then manipulate, use, sell, what have you. And so this was scraping, right? They were scraping all this data off of LinkedIn, and actually turned out they were scraping a huge amount of data from LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn wasn't very happy about this, of course, and so they filed a lawsuit against HiQ. Now, there was a little bit extra context around the timing of this lawsuit, so it wasn't necessarily that LinkedIn just found out about it. LinkedIn was actually going to start offering a service similar to the service that HiQ was offering, having to do with data-driven analytics. And it is assumed by HiQ, now, got to tell you whose side's saying what. It's assumed by HiQ that LinkedIn was suing them not because that they were inherently opposed to the data analytics stuff, but that they cared because it was going to cut into LinkedIn's particular market share for this product that LinkedIn was trying to create. So this battle went to court. I talked a little bit about it and how I was severely concerned about how this scraping could possibly be very dangerous if it was allowed to continue. But I didn't know the way the courts were going to go. But I was hoping sincerely that scraping would be ruled illegal. And the reason for this is there is essentially a computer hacking law. I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but LinkedIn was suing under this kind of computer hacking law, essentially alleging that HiQ was hacking them by scraping all this data that was publicly available through LinkedIn profiles, like you might have or I have. So it went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided they weren't really interested in taking it. So they remanded it down to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that's where we received our final ruling just this past week. So, drum roll, please. It turns out this data scraping is legal. Now, so I want to talk a little bit about this decision and how I feel about it, but also I want to kind of give you the, who's happy with it, who's upset about it. So first of all, let's just talk very plainly about the ruling. I think the ruling is wrong. I think so the ruling tells me two things, right? So I'm not necessarily sure from a legal perspective if the ruling is wrong. So let me just, clarify that. I will say that the ruling is certainly outside the interests of privacy professionals like myself. And I am sincerely concerned that this level of access to publicly available data that can just be scraped and used is essentially going to allow people to make more form-fitting profiles to regular people for the purposes of ad tech, and potentially other malicious reasons as well. Now, of course, companies will tell you that they're not using this maliciously, but it is important to know that with all data that is being shared in this way, it can very easily be used by people who are malicious actors to do things like find people who don't want to be found for whatever reasons, including a past, domestic violence and things like that, survivors and all that. But also, people may just not want to be found, right? We have a right to privacy under the US Constitution. It's poorly enforced and it's essentially been overwritten, but we do actually have that right under the Fourth Amendment. So, it does kind of feel like that this is just one more way that the US court system has shown that there is no real right to privacy, that we are very quickly eroding away whatever right to privacy we may have had in this country, especially when it comes to the fact that we live more and more of our lives online. And because a lot of that data is publicly available or is easily scrapable or whatever, if we change our preferences, the internet's forever, right? So you can use things like the Wayback Machine, archiving, all that stuff to create, to look at things that were open once that are now hidden. Even if you go change your LinkedIn settings to private for everything today, someone could look up what your LinkedIn profile looked in yesterday or the day before or whatever they could access. and then use that to find out information about you, including where you work. And then, of course, they can deduce what office you're working on. They can assume what time you're going to be there. It can just get very creepy very quickly, right? And from a privacy perspective, I just think that this is a very bad idea. So who likes this ruling and who doesn't? First of all, HiQ loves this ruling, right? They are very interested in maintaining their business model. I genuinely think that if this was ruled illegal, they would not exist any longer, because this was kind of their whole shtick. So obviously they're happy about it, and LinkedIn's not happy about it. But there is some discussion that among historians, archivists, and journalists that, hey, this is actually a really great way for people in the business of finding other people for investigative reasons or historical reasons, or creating archives of things. It's really helpful for them, because that data scraping is what allows things like the Wayback Machine. It allows reporters to find individuals to speak to, about certain upcoming stories, and a variety of other things like that, right? Where there would be an inherent interest. Journalists, I'm sure, and archivists and historians would probably argue that there's a public interest in this data being legally allowed to be scrapable. And if you told them it was a privacy issue, I imagine that they would turn around to you and say, well, if you are really worried about it, you would change your settings, and make it harder for us to do that. Now, personally, I think I've debunked that with the talk about looking at records that existed in the past, and keeping in mind the internet is more or less forever. But I do want to give them their due. This is one of the reasons they're happy about this decision. And I think from a purely professional perspective, they're trying to come at it in a way that is not inherently against privacy. I don't think these people are against privacy. What I do think is that their professional interests kind of clash with privacy, and they're more interested potentially in having conversations about what can you do with data and how much data can we work with, as opposed to how can we minimize data and how can we make sure that data is kept as privately as possible. So now, of course, on the other side, privacy activists and advocates are very upset about the decision, as well as LinkedIn. Of course, as I mentioned, LinkedIn is probably upset from a business perspective. I'm not sure LinkedIn is, super concerned on the privacy front, but I don't want to impugn their character or what have you. But from a privacy perspective, obviously this is very worrying, because you've essentially said, and by the way, this is not just this particular case. And one of the reasons that archivists and journalists and things are happy about this is because this isn't just about LinkedIn and HiQ. This means that all data scraping of this nature is potentially legal. And so that could have huge and broad sweeping implications. So on the privacy side, obviously you don't want your social media information harvested for whatever purpose. Clearview AI got in trouble for doing this for law enforcement. Now, if it looks like this type of thing is legal in the US, you can have a Clearview type company, and by the way, they do operate in the US, essentially, from a federal perspective, being able to harvest huge amounts of your biological data and give it to police. Now, that is inherently more dangerous than them harvesting that data and giving it to ad tech or like marketing firms, because marketing firms just want you to buy something they have, right? The police are going to use this in ways that can possibly take away your liberty, or invade your privacy in ways that they can do on behalf of the state, right? So from a privacy perspective, it's really important that if we allow something like this to be legal, we have to find somewhere that it has limits, right? We can't allow for the Clearview example to be what is legal across the country, because then, there is essentially infinite government surveillance. And I think that's really, really dangerous. Obviously, there's a ton of surveillance that goes on right now in America, right? And one of the reasons that we have so many issues with data privacy and no federal privacy law in this country is because there's so much surveillance here in the US. But truthfully, as we move forward with precedents like this one, we have to push back as privacy professionals and advocates and say, it can be legal up until here, right? And for me, I think my personal take on this is, first of all, let me just put out that I'm not comfortable with this, right? I mentioned earlier, I'm not comfortable with this ruling. But, if you are going to go with a ruling like this anyway, I think it's really important that we kind of keep it in the private market sphere, and we specifically outlaw things like corporations using this to help police, right? So your Ring doorbell, anything that, like, so for example, people upload Ring doorbell cam stuff to the Citizen app, or the, there's other apps like that too. But, if that data is accessible more or less publicly, it can be scraped too, right? So you're creating this giant, I don't like to use the word big brother, but you're kind of, that's where you're heading towards. So anyway, I think there has to be, if we're going to allow this for advertising, and again, I'm not super thrilled with that, I think there has to be a very hard line in the government space, and we just say, you know what, if we're going to let capitalism run its way with us in this way, then we have to make sure that the buck stops at giving to the government, right? It needs to just be used for ways to market things to people. And by the way, if we were really thinking about ways to make this type of harvesting safer for individuals, we need a global opt-out, right? We need some way that you can register to, the system that's holding your data, or the people who are scraping your data, or the government, or some combination of the three, that you don't want this to happen, or you identify with a protected class, say like survivors of domestic abuse, and things like that, that allow for people to protect themselves from the types of malicious acts that this scraping can lead to. So all in all, I think this is a genuinely bad decision. I'm very worried now that other companies, seeing this example, will try and do this with other social networks, or other information, and essentially use it to compartmentalize profiles of individuals in very scary ways, perhaps more scary ways than we have right now. It just makes me nervous about our continued lack of privacy rights in this country. And I hope, although I'm not confident in that, we either get a federal privacy law that kind of, helps quash out a lot of these violations, or, and this is more likely, we just continue to get state privacy laws that make it harder to do this type of bulk collection, until there's finally enough disparity between the states that the federal government feels the need to step in. So essentially, that's it. This brings to an end our following of the LinkedIn versus HiQ case. Once again, I think this is a genuinely terrible decision. It might not be legally wrong, but it does indicate, in my opinion, the continued diminution of privacy rights of Americans in this country.
Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, throw a like on it, share with your friends, and subscribe for more of our content. You can also find all of our videos and clips on youtube.com. Just search Let Them Eat Bread and you'll find all of our content. Alright guys, see you next time. Bye for now.